It's time to turn our attention to other stories. The Central Bank of Nigeria has appointed a new board for Sky Bank.
The Apex Bank took over the commercial bank on Monday in what it called liquidity inadequacy. Alhaji MK Ahmed and Tokumbo Abero will serve as chairman and managing director, respectively.
At a press briefing in Lagos, the governor of Central Bank of Nigeria, Godwin Emefiele, assured depositors that the bank is not in distress and that their money remains safe. Giving reasons for the Apex Bank's decision, Emefiele said the liquidity ratio in this bank has been weakening.
These proactive moves have become unavoidable in view of the persistent failure of Sky Bank PLC to meet minimum thresholds in critical prudential and adequacy ratios, which has culminated in the bank's permanent presence at the Central Bank of Nigeria lending windows. In particular, Sky Bank's liquidity and non-performing loans ratios have been below and above the required thresholds, respectively, for quite a while.
He added that the CBN intervention is to ensure that it does not get into a position that it cannot be rescued, while depositors will risk losing their monies.
That the fact that Sky Bank is to reiterate the fact that Sky Bank is not in distress and remains a healthy bank in the system. The CBN hereby assures depositors, shareholders, and all relevant stakeholders that there is no reason for concern or panic as we seek their continued cooperation and support for the bank at this time. It is our expectation that the shareholders and remaining executive directors would work seamlessly with the new team to ensure that the fortunes of the bank are restored in the shortest possible time.
Well, joining us in the studio is an economist, Tunde Olatunji, and from Abuja studio is a financial analyst, Aliyu. Audu, good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Honorable Tunde Olatunji. Well, it is Sky Bank today. There are fears that we may see more banks being taken over by the CBN. Of course, it looks like the CBN governor is talking from both sides of the mouth, saying that the banks are actually healthy. But we have this takeover right now that's going on. What do we make of it?
Well, thank you. I think it's not coming as a shock, really, for those who have closely monitored the happenings in the financial sector. The 9 months ending of 2015, 3 banks were actually on the radar in terms of their capital adequacy, and that boils down majorly to the growing non-performing loans they have in their books. Sky Bank incidentally is one of systematically important banks. Out of the 8 that we have, when you talk of systematically important banks, these are banks who they are 8 in number. When you look at how important they are to the financial system of Nigeria, they are so big. They have about 75% share of the total market. And Sky Bank, for instance, at that time from their financials, was having something about a little above 16% capital adequacy, and then the standard or the minimum CBN requirement was supposed to be 15% for the systematically important banks, of which Sky Bank was one of them. So, and at the same time, CBN was looking at how do we increase the general provisioning, from 1% to 2%. So when you had that together, you know that they are close to the brink. And you don't forget that this 15% was supposed to take effect from 1st of July. So I'm sure applying that to the current situation of Sky Bank makes it fall below the threshold of capital adequacy. And what the CBN has simply carried out was, is to be proactive, so that you can ensure that you don't have depositors lose their money, lose their funds. So it's better to take such steps. And it's just a change of management, not to say that the bank is insolvent. Okay. And of course, a stitch in time, they say, saves nine others.
But how do you now relate that to the issue of the cash reserves that the CBN allows some of these banks to now dip into to offset some of their backlogs?
Yes. You hear from the comment of this CBN governor that said Skybank over the years have been enjoying access to what we call there's a lending a special lending facility that banks can enjoy, so that at least you can meet your daily, but there's a limit to which you can do that. When you see a bank that is literally surviving on such lending up a window, which means if they don't
overnight lending rate,
if they don't without recourse to that special lending facility, of course they will not be able to meet their daily obligations. Take for instance, they're clearing their daily clearing activities, and when it's consistent, when take for instance for 5 consecutive days you have been doing this, and the CBN is saying you have literally been surviving on intervention from us. And I read through the communique, or let me say the press statement of the CBN governor, and he said they've met a number of times over a very long period of time, say months, to try to see how the management of Skybank can turn around the fortune of that bank, to make sure that they reposition. And one of the options they have on the table was for them to raise more capital. That is basic. But you look at the economic situation.
How were they going to do that
in
with
the
the
country
state
for
of the
now?
economy?
So they had problem raising capital, and CBN felt, well, there may be need to change leadership. And when you look at one of the reasons why Skybank will get itself to this point is a whole number of factors. You don't forget that they acquired a very big bank, Ministry Bank, for over 120 billion naira. And that is just in late 2014. And then they tried to meet up the deadline of November 3, 2014, or as at that time. And the shareholders meeting that was held just around a year ago approved that.
Was it also not legal for them to have what it's called earning asset? Do they have such earning asset where that could be in liquid form? Do they have such things?
Yes, they do. It's not as if the bank is in a mess totally. It's not what the CBN is saying is that we will not allow depositors to lose their funds. We will not allow banks in Nigeria to fail. You're talking of them raising
more capital. If they can't get this capital through
the stock
stipulated, yes, they can't get this capital through the stipulated means of their normal. This N is supposed to also help bring in capital for them. Why isn't that not helping them?
It simply means what they have, even from their N, is not sufficient vis-a-vis their risk.
Okay.
Do you understand? So
all right, at this point, let's bring in our guest in Abuja, Aliyu, Audu. Good morning once again, and thanks for staying with us. So, just weighing on this, we're looking at Skybank right now. With CBN is saying that the loan book of Skybank is poor, and this is one of the big banks. There are reports already of fears or concerns that other big banks may just be in the same boat as Skybank. Do you have such concerns?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, absolutely. As I said, there are about 3 banks that have been on the radar for some time, since last year, and Skybank is one of them. I think they have a bad loan portfolio of about 700 billion. And when a bank has a bad loan of about 700 billion, you should know that, and the loans are not performing, you should know that that's a lot of assets, a lot of risk assets in the hands of people. And these risk assets are depositors' funds. So what it will mean is that they will not be able to meet up to their obligation. If somebody goes to withdraw their money, they might not be able to meet up to their obligation. And the CBN did the rightful thing to have come in and taken over the bank, the management of the bank, so that depositors don't lose their funds. It's very important. This is what happened some years back to banks like Intercontinental Bank and a couple of other banks. So I think the CBN has done the right thing. This shows that the CBN is being watchful and keeping an eye on all the banks. And one way the CBN does that is by this window which allows banks to borrow from the CBN. So if a bank keeps coming to that window very often and relying on the CBN, that means that is what is depending on. Perhaps that is the way it's meeting its depositors' demands. So and as such, I think the CBN has done the right thing to have moved to take over the bank and the management of the bank, and however the bad assets will be moved to AMCON and fresh funds will be injected in. Obviously, the bank has failed to recapitalize given the current economic situation. So I think it's appropriate that the CBN came in and took over the bank and
all right.
Change the executive management of the bank.
Okay, just hold on, gentlemen. Let's try to interpret the term non-performing loans, because that's what we're looking at. We're not necessarily just focusing on Sky Bank, but we're just using that as a template here. Now, how does non-performing loans affect the operation of banks in Nigeria? Lending is one of the main activities of banks in Nigeria. This is evidenced by the volume of loans that constitute bank assets and the annual volume of credit granted to borrowers in private and public sectors of the economy. Loans can even be said to be one of the major sources of revenue for banks through significant interest income earnings.
So what are non-performing bank loans? A non-performing loan is a debt which the borrower is late on making payments. According to the International Monetary Fund, that's IMF, a loan is termed non-performing if it is 90 days, that's 3 months overdue, and payment is not made.
The Central Bank of Nigeria's Financial Stability Report for December 2015, released in May, puts the non-performing loan ratio of the banking industry at 649.63 billion naira.
A document obtained from the CBN by the Daily Trust shows that the non-performing loans, otherwise known as bad loans, jumped from 600 billion naira last year to 1.38 trillion naira in April this year, and that's in 2016 as a result of the economic situation affecting repayment of loans to banks.
Now, this means that the bad loans ratio shot to 10.1% from around 3.6% last year, which was well above the regulatory threshold limit of 5%. Let's even look at Fitch and Moody's ratings, that downgraded the credit ratings of several large Nigerian banks because of rising non-performing loans. So the point right now is, how do we bring these banks back from the brink? Let me put that question to Aliyu Audu. How can, yes, the CBN has intervened in the case of Sky Bank, but looking at other banks, which Fitch and Moody have already said, look, these big banks are already at risk because of non-performing loans. How can this be turned around as quickly as possible so they don't, fall off the cliff?
I think one of the ways the banks can get their loans performing again is if obviously because of the current economic situation, you cannot force business people to pay, and because it's dependent upon the economic situation, especially the fall in oil prices and a problem in the oil sector, this will not allow people to be able to pay their loans. So the only way the bank can now assist is by going to raise fresh funds from the market, recapitalizing their banks. Because unfortunately, the banks don't have a control over the economic system right now we're experiencing in this country. So the only alternative is to raise fresh capital, and that is the only way forward.
Okay, I'd like to agree with you, but perhaps the issue of some banks actually declaring a profit warning as at the first quarter of this year. About 10 banks actually declared that profit warning. Do you think the capital market still is a veritable place to raise money now? Don't forget the issue of the equity index downgrading of the Nigerian stock market as it is.
Yeah, again, as I said, the capital market is not the best place to raise money right now because we can see fall in oil prices. That is affecting the naira. A lot of investors are scared. So the market is on a downturn. So the capital market is not exempted from this problem either. So I don't think it's the best place to raise money. As a matter of fact, there's not much money in the economy right now. Investors are very adverse to investing. So not a lot of people want to invest in the capital market or in other sectors. Even the value of real estate has fallen down. There's a lot of international shocks around Europe, America, due to Brexit, and a lot of things happening. So the Nigerian capital market is not exempted from this, and as such, banks might not be able to go there to raise money. So this is a catch-22 situation. It's a difficult situation right now. The only alternative, until the economy gets better, is for the CBN to move in as they rightly did. Because obviously you cannot invent recapitalization from the air. You can't go and get the investors from the air. The CBN has to come in as the last resort. One of the functions of the CBN is the last resort of all banks. So this is where it's playing its function. It's coming to take over the bank. And if at all, I hope not, if any other bank should face such crisis, the CBN will have to intervene at this time.
Okay,
because investors are very adverse. Nobody wants to invest at this stage.
Indeed, and this is a real problem. I mean, if there's really no money out there in the market and investors are averse to, you know, going, this is like double jeopardy. But many have criticized the CBN's method of loan recovery, which they say is one of the major reasons. This name and shame, you know, game, and of course, you know, many of the bank's investors had to divest and pull out their money, and this has led to the situation of liquidity challenge that the banks have. But I will allow you to answer that question when we come back. All right, we're still on to our second big story of the day. We're looking at non-performing loans and, of course, the health of Nigerian banks. It looks like one Nigerian bank may have bitten the dust, but, well, it's just a management change right now, and we hope it doesn't go beyond that. Our guests are still here, Tunde, Olatunji, and, of course, Aliyu, Audu over there in Abuja. Let me come back to the question I asked you earlier about, you know, the CBN's method of loan recovery, which, you know, many say is not working. You know, the situation where you have the name and shame that has led to investors actually divesting from the banks and actually taking some of these banks even to court, and, you know, as a major factor with this non-performing loans that we're talking about.
Thank you. I think one of the problems that we have in our society is also the repayment culture of our people. Because, you know, arguably one of the most important canons of lending is character. It doesn't matter if the capacity is there, it doesn't matter if the collateral is okay. If the character is faulty, then of course, bad loans are bound to happen. CBN would not ordinarily have gone to the point of trying to, you know, exploit that or adopt that approach. It is due to failure of, you know, all other conventional approaches that are, you know, that are available for them to use. And you would also agree with the fact that some of the debtors on the name and shame list, these are facilities running into billions, and some of them are close to a decade or even more. And then the obligor just seems to see that it's okay, it's fine. And you see some of them, they're into some other businesses and they're doing fine. And some of them are even living extravagant lifestyle. And while the facility is there, and you remember that when CBN intervened in 2008, and ANCOM was set up and all of that, the assumption, you know, the premise was for the fact that with the introduction or establishment of ANCOM, you know, injection of capital into those affected banks was excess of 600 billion and all of that. In a very short while, there's going to be something significant. But as we speak, ANCOM still has, you know, debt in its kitty that is over 4 trillion naira. You can imagine how much that means to us.
Okay, so which of course begged the question, should ANCOM be scrapped if it's not performing to its billing?
Well, for me, I think I'm just beginning to see an AMCON that is really living up to its building. With the recent, court judgments they've been able to secure. And of course, I think that is happening because of the change of leadership at the center that we're having, because you see that even the Minister of Justice, Attorney General, is, it's like, an ad hoc committee that is set up to work with AMCON to get these things done. And the question is, should it have taken this long? We're talking of, our resources that is put together.
But you cannot absolve the bank themselves, who, people experts have said there's some level of collusion on the part of banks themselves, just because they know that there's an AMCON or even NDIC to clean up the mess after them.
AMCON is more of their friend, not the NDIC. NDIC is the undertaker.
Well, yeah, that's on the one hand. But let's even, give you more information. Now, credit to the private sector relative to the end of December 2014 rose by 3.29% to 18 million, that's 18.72 trillion as of December 31, 2015, compared with the annualized growth rate of 8.54% recorded in the first half of 2015.
The growth in credit to the private sector, especially the core private sector, reflected the impact of various policies of the CBN that enhance the lending capacity of banks and encourage increased lending to the private sector. But still, in spite of this, one would expect more from the banking sector. Let's take this question now to Audu, Aliyu Audu in Abuja, looking at the lending rate of the banks. IMF actually suggested a couple of months back that the lending rates are too high, that the banks should come down a bit. Perhaps this is also affecting the repayment capacity of this non-performing loans.
Obviously, the lending rate in the bank is too high. I was one person that has been campaigning that, to have a very good economy, we have to reduce interest rates. But that in itself contributes to loans going bad, because people cannot be able to meet up to the repayment, or they don't make enough profit, given the downturn in the economy, to be able to repay back. But let's not forget that a lot of these loans are not given to the real sector. A lot of these loans are not even properly documented or collateralized. A lot of these loans are given to either to their friends or to one person or the other because they know him very well. And as such, if there's crisis, these banks don't even have anything to fall back on. They don't have any collateral. They don't have any proper documentation done. And they haven't even done the proper feasibility study of the business before they lend out the money. These monies are given to, not because you have a very good proposal, not because you have a very good forecast for an income stream, but because you know this person or you know that person. So that is what most of these loans are all about.
Indeed. Now, Aliyu Audu, sorry to cut you there. Sorry to cut you there. Will this then be a learning curve for the banks going forward, of course, including the supervisory bank itself, the CBN? Of course, you have a situation where banks have been involved in public sector funding rather than really driving the real sector, that you just talked about. What can the banks take away from what is happening right now, especially with the overexposure to oil and gas, which is a major factor in this non-performing loan situation that we have?
Okay, yes, I think it's a learning curve for the banks. And, the banks should have learned enough from the Sanusi era, when a lot of banks collapsed due to lending primarily to one sector and giving out uncollateralized loans. So I think the bank should have learned enough. If they haven't learned, this should be another learning curve for them. So that's what I think the bank should do. It's a very good learning point. They should learn that if rather than giving loan to one sector, concentrating on the oil sector, it's time to diversify. You should not just lend to the oil sector. We have manufacturing, we have agriculture, we have other sectors. And if you're lending, you should lend properly. There's also a rule in the bank that says you should not lend more than the single obligor limit. The single obligor limit is about 5% of, or thereabout, of shareholders' funds. Some banks break this threshold and go above that. So this is also another learning curve. Let's stick to best banking practices. Let's lend according to best banking practices. You know, so banks should diversify. A learning curve from this is that banks should diversify, lend to the various sectors of the economy, not just to one particular sector. You know, so I think that's a very good point for them to learn, and they have to learn from this.
Do you think some of these banks are overgrown babies? If you remember from the years of Soludo and all, this is really not new. And do you think the CBN at some point was slacking in its own duty, really?
The situation we find ourselves today is also a carryover of some of the mistakes of the past. You know, for me, something has been bothering my mind. Take, for instance, how do you explain the fact that a bank that was pre-qualified to be, you know, liquid enough to acquire another bank in less than 24 months for such, you know, a huge amount of over 100 billion, suddenly find itself in this mess? You know, these are fundamental issues that begs for, you know, that begs for attention. And you also, we just talked about the lending rate, which I would also want to add something to. Yeah. Yes, it is true that the lending rates are on the high side, but we have to look at what are the fundamentals for arriving at some of these figures. For the banks too, you have to look at what is the cost of the funds they're trading with. These are the issues. A number of banks today, majority of our banks today have a deposit mix that is more tilted on, you know, toxic, liabilities. We talk of fixed deposit more than it should have been, you know, DDAs, talk about savings account, current account balances, which they with. These are the issues. A number of banks today, majority of our banks today have a deposit mix that is more tilted on, you know, toxic, liabilities. We talk of fixed deposit more than it should have been, you know, DDAs, talk about savings account, current account balances, which they can trade with, rather than time deposits, which are coming to them at high cost. And also is the cost of doing business in Nigeria. Virtually all of them have to have run on diesel.
What's the use of all that if you don't get your loans back, really?
Exactly.
What's the use?
I'm actually trying to explain that those are the factors that you put together to arrive at those lending rates, which means everybody's affected. By the end of the day, when you give up facilities and it's going at a cost that is pretty difficult for the lender to pay back, then we find ourselves in situations like this. So,
all right, so let's bring you more information. The Nigeria Deposit Insurance Corporation, NDIC, annual report for 2015 indicates an 82.87% increase in the non-performing loans of commercial banks in the country.
All right, the same report also puts the total amount lost to 12.279 fraud-related cases in the banking sector at 18.031 billion naira for 2015, which is a drop of about 7.59 billion naira, or 29.63%, compared to the 25.608 billion naira lost in 2014.
Now, some factors behind the increase in non-performing loans in domestic money banks include high interest rates that banks charge. Of course, we already talked about that. Yeah. Customers may default payment if they cannot meet up with interest requirements when paying back. And the CBN noted that the falling oil prices have impacted negatively on the balance sheets of many banks.
Non-performing loans resulting from foreign currency exposures are straining banks' capacity to meet their foreign currency obligation, which leads us to the question of the special window, the market intervention of the CBN, so much so that it actually created a liquidity squeeze in the bank, and the CBN had to keep injecting money. Is it really a penny-wise, a pounds a foolish idea?
Well, the central bank is simply carried out its statutory responsibility to ensure that the banking sector in the country is stabilized and things are moving fine. If you withdraw the special lending facility of the CBN today, then virtually all our banks will not be able to go on with their operations. You know, virtually over all our banks, enjoy this facility. There's also this special deposit facility, which means when you have excess cash, you're supposed to. But what we have seen in the last couple of months is the fact that, as the outstanding balance of this on the special lending facility is increasing, which means more banks, going to this window to be able to draw money to support their operation. You also see that those who have placed excess deposit with CBN in their special deposit, they are also equally bringing it down. So that tells us that there's liquidity squeeze, and of course, because the CBN would ordinarily not want to create panic in the heart of Nigerians, and then what their responsibility to ensure that they take measures that can, of course, stabilize those banks, because the truth of the matter is that we're still going to weather this storm for some time to come. It is because Nigerian economy is a mono economy, and everything is tied around oil and gas, and that was one of the reasons why the bank also said that you look at the sectors around which one, because the banks are essentially set up to make profits for the shareholders.
So
they also look at where's the juice.
Okay, all right, we have to let you gentlemen off right now. Thank you so much, Honorable Tunde, Olatunji, and of course Aliyu, Audu, for your time over there in Abuja. Thanks for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
It's good to be here. Thank you so much.